Good morning, everyone. My name is Alyssa Muller, and I am the Career and College Readiness Manager at the State Board of Education, and I also provided staff support to the Mastery-Based Learning Work Group. So just as a reminder, I presented EOGOAC last year at the beginning of the work group process, and today I am here to provide an overview of the work group's process and recommendations, but I'm planning to leave the majority of time for questions and discussion when I finish my overview. Heather, next slide. So in the authorizing legislation for the work group, Washington defined mastery-based learning, and I won't read this full definition to you, but I would note that particularly Part D aligns with some of your work around ensuring that students receive individualized differentiated support. Next slide. The work group was charged with exploring the barriers to mastery-based learning and providing recommendations around how to increase capacity for mastery-based learning in our state, including the development of a mastery-based learning pathway to a high school diploma. Additionally, you'll see that the work group was charged with two other tasks: learning from the schools in our state that have already been implementing some form of mastery or competency-based learning, as well as considering improvements in the high school and beyond plan as an essential tool for mastery-based learning. Next slide. So Frida was your official representative to the work group, but two other EOGOAC members were also part of the work group, Representative Santos and Senator Wellman, who have both been huge champions of mastery-based learning. Additionally, there were members representing the various levels of our education system, including a representative from both OSPI and SBE, as well as a local school board member, a superintendent, a principal, a teacher, a counselor, and perhaps most importantly, a student. Next slide. So school looks very different today than it did when the Mastery-Based Learning Work Group began our journey due to COVID-19 and the reckoning our country is undergoing as we grapple with our historical and present day structural racism. The work group members believe that Washington has both an opportunity and an imperative to respond to this dual pandemic of COVID-19 and the structural racism that our school system has never effectively addressed. The work group members believe that mastery-based learning is the way to transform our education system to close both the opportunity gap and the resulting achievement gap. And the work group recognized EOGOAC's leadership over the last decade in placing the responsibility for the achievement gap on the education system rather than on students, and was very intentional in using the terms opportunity gap and achievement gap as you have defined them in your past reports. I would also note that mastery-based learning erases the need for both gifted or remedial courses because it recognizes that each student's learning happens differently for each subject, while simultaneously valuing the knowledge and skills that students bring with them from their diverse cultures and their learning that has occurred outside of the classroom. A mastery-based learning system could also better support special education students because of the focus on meeting students where they are based on their personalized needs. The work group also believes that demonstrated mastery of content rather than seat time should be the measure by which students are seen as ready to progress in their learning journey. Next slide. So various programs already exist in Washington that align well with the goals of mastery-based learning, such as accelerated learning, project-based learning, career and technical education, and learning experiences that take place outside of the school building. Before the inception of the work group, there were also several policy conditions that the work group was able to build upon. So our state definition of a high school credit has been unrelated to seat time for about a decade. Additionally, there are also some examples of students in Washington being able to advance in their learning at a pace that is appropriate for them. For instance, middle school students earning high school credit, as well as early college or dual credit programs. Finally, the Washington School Directors Association has had a world language model policy and procedure for mastery or competency-based credit for over a decade. In response to COVID-19, the state board worked with WASDA to create subject-specific model policies for mastery-based credit in all subject areas that have state learning standards. Next slide. So I'm going to focus on reviewing the work group's recommendations that may be of particular interest to EOGOAC. The first area that the work group was charged with was addressing barriers to mastery-based learning, and the work group focused primarily on barriers at the high school level because they are more inherently ingrained in the school structure based on the credit graduation requirements, GPA, possible transcript issues, and other things like that happen primarily in high school. The work group also recognized that any shift in education will fail if students and their families are not meaningfully engaged from the beginning, and noted in its report that it is imperative that any school that begins a journey toward mastery-based learning simultaneously brings students and families along with them through authentic engagement efforts. The work group's report referred to EOGOAC's recommendations around the importance of family engagement efforts that are culturally responsive and that authentically engage families, particularly families of color, throughout their child's education experience. Other barriers mentioned in the report that needed to be addressed are reviewing the state's accountability and funding systems for alignment with mastery-based learning, as well as engaging education partners regarding additional barriers to mastery-based learning in the next phase of the work. For the high school and beyond plan, one of the recommendations was supporting students through additional school counselors, and this had several parts. So first, the work group recommended that the legislature fund certificated counselors at the middle school level in line with the American School Counselor Association's ratio to support beginning the high school and beyond plan process in a more robust way that sets students up for success as they begin their high school career. This aligns to EOGOAC's recommendation from your 2020 report that the legislature fund the ASCA recommended ratio of 250:1 in the prototypical school model. To support the development of a diverse counselor workforce, the work group strongly supports working with the Washington School Counselors Association and higher education institutions that offer school counselor certifications, as well as working with districts to attract and retain school counselors of color. Likewise, cultural competency professional development is needed for white counselors working with students of color and students from diverse cultures. The work group also recommended that districts be required to allow high school counselors to spend a certain percentage of their time, for instance, 80% as proposed in previously unsuccessful legislation, in direct support of students' learning goals, which would of course include high school and beyond planned activities. The next recommendation around high school and beyond plan was that professional development is needed for all educators at all levels to support high school and beyond planning and mastery-based learning. When teachers understand each student's individual learning goals as articulated in their high school and beyond plan, then they can begin to tailor their instruction to become more relevant and responsive to their student interests. For this to take place, however, professional development is needed for teaching staff and other educators on both mastery-based learning as well as the high school and beyond plan. And training cannot be limited to only classroom teachers. All educators at all levels must be provided training to support a mastery-based learning system. Finally, the work group spent a significant amount of time talking about for a student's high school and beyond plan development, as well as throughout the student's educational experience. We have to be able to have students and their families partner with schools in authentic ways. So the next charge to the work group was around the development of mastery-based pathways to the earning of a high school diploma. And the work group made several recommendations in this area. The recommendation around developing a Washington profile of a graduate was made because although the work group has made a lot of progress this year, this is such important work, and of course the work is not done. So there is a need to continue the work group with a focus on developing the profile of the graduate and to make any other recommendations necessary to support implementation of mastery-based learning. The profile of the graduate idea builds on models from other states and is a promise to students and to the community that regardless of grades achieved or their particular pathway completed, students will develop the self-agency and critical thinking skills across a variety of disciplines that will help them problem solve and succeed after high school. The work group's desire is that this profile of a graduate will guide policy around high school graduation requirements. It would signify the expansion of Washington's concept of a high school diploma from one based on just academic content to one based on a holistic view of the student. I would also note that in the State Board of Education's request legislation around extending the work group, there is a specific call out to the EOGOAC. The language states, in developing the profile, the work group shall consult with students, families, and educators who have been underserved by the education system, examples of which include communities of color, English language learners, and students with disabilities. The work group shall seek guidance from the EOGOAC regarding how to meaningfully engage with these communities. I just wanted to note that. As far as supporting mastery-based learning implementation through a state and regional support structure, the work group heard clearly from schools already doing this work, both in our state and across the nation, that a support structure must be in place to allow for educator professional learning and collaboration. So the State Board of Education is beginning the process to seek private funding to support this recommendation. Finally, Washington State Policy Framework for a Mastery-Based Learning Diploma is not creating a separate high school diploma. Whether students earn a diploma through meeting the current credit graduation requirements framework or through the Mastery-Based Learning Framework, the student will meet the same state learning standards. In essence, the vision would be a system where students have multiple opportunities to demonstrate what they know and can do. The last recommendation in this area was to engage higher education in the next phase of the work. The final charge to the work group was around expanding mastery-based credit opportunities to meet graduation requirements. And because of the coronavirus and the resulting school building closures, the work group encouraged the State Board of Education to go ahead and adopt a rule regarding policies that can be helpful to districts now. So in September, the State Board adopted a rule that outlines the process for granting students mastery-based credit. The rules have several components. They outline what must be included in a district's policy around mastery-based credit, including an equity provision. Districts are required to review disaggregated student data to see which subgroups of students are receiving mastery-based credit. And if a district finds disproportionality among student groups, the district must take appropriate action to ensure equitable access to mastery-based crediting opportunities. The rules also outline broad categories for student demonstration of proficiency that districts could consider making available to their students, such as non-standardized local assessment methods like a portfolio or student presentation, as well as being able to award credit for learning experiences conducted outside of the school building. Next slide. So I just put this slide in to provide some direct links to the various resources that I mentioned today and a link to the Mastery-Based Learning Workgroup's webpage where additional resources are available. And so with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Alyssa. Okay, if anyone has specific questions for Alyssa or comments for discussion, please indicate in the chat. I see Representative Santos, you have a comment. Go ahead.
I do want to commend Alyssa and the state board staff for helping to facilitate this work. It has been at times challenging, but I think more often, at least for this member, invigorating. And the piece that I really want to hone in on for the EOGOAC, and it kind of goes back to not only what Alyssa said on this final slide, but it was like one of the, might have been the second slide that described the work of the Mastery-Based Learning work group. And it is this notion of sort of expeditious, I'm going to use the term sort of assumed differentiation of student needs and delivering the right type of education to a student so that he or she is able to advance upon mastery. Alyssa said a couple of times, made a couple of references, and I just want to underscore that it does, in my mind anyway, eliminate the need for specific set-asides for gifted, because every student is gifted and they advance on mastery. So it's not like that our system is holding any student back. But it also, I think, addresses, I think, the movement that we're seeing today in the field of special education. I often talk about my mom and her being at the vanguard of the mainstreaming movement, which now is so old-fashioned. We are really focused on inclusionary practice. And mastery-based learning is an example of inclusionary practice, because outside of the quote-unquote non-academic supports that a special education student might need to be able to focus on his or her academics, here that student is still advancing at their own pace and receiving sort of the differentiated instruction that he or she needs to be able to advance their academic career. And so, you know, when we focus on equity, for me, that is really a full expression of equity, where every student is challenged, every student advances, every student accomplishes, and every student is their own agent. And if you haven't figured out by now that I'm a big fan of mastery-based learning, I'll just be very explicit and say, yes, we need this in our state, and we need to be able to then have our system spend its money in a way that supports every student on their educational journey, and not set aside specific pots for specific groups, but say, recognize that every student is an individual. And I guess that's all I'm going to say. But thank you so much, Alyssa. That was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you, Representative Santos.
Frida, you're up next.
Yes, I just wanted to reinforce and echo what Representative Santos said. And I also wanted to give a special thank you to Alyssa for corralling this group, as any group can tend to be like ducks going in different directions. And she did a really good job in bringing us all together. Especially for me, I think what was most gratifying, if you will, was the sensitivity by Alyssa and the rest of the committee members about making sure that the issues that we hold dear with on EOGOAC were addressed. And so thank you, Alyssa, for your leadership on that. I really appreciated. My biggest worry was that we would be promoting another system that just perpetuated the systemic racism and the institutionalized racism that already exists. And so I think that those fears of mine were allayed, and I too have become a big proponent of mastery-based learning. So thank you, Alyssa. Really appreciate your hard work on this.
Thank you, Frida.
Go ahead, Senator Wellman.
Thank you so much, Heather. And thank you, Alyssa. Great presentation. One of the things, I don't like to be a Debbie Downer, but, and I shouldn't use anybody's name, I don't like to be negative, but I do want to call people's attention, which came across to me as I was thinking about the richness of this presentation and the concepts and you know, the environment that's being created, just to put out there, which I think Representative Santos alluded to, the resources needed. We have resources in pots, but even if you put all those pots together into one lump sum, I still think that we have to be very much aware of the professional development, the funding, how much is really going to be necessary. I think we have the vision and the excitement behind the vision, but I think that we really need to look at and double down on the resources that are really needed to enable the future that we see possible, and be very much aware of that. And we're going to have to share that and bring everybody else to the table in order to not only embrace but actually actualize this vision.
you so much.
Yeah, sorry, Heather. I really want to thank Senator Wellman for that important note. This represents a significant shift in the way we look at education. It is a shift moving our educational system from the 19th century to the 21st. I mean, this is crazy business that we expect our students to become the well-rounded students that we have enshrined in statute, but we insist that they do it with a horse and a buggy, effectively. And I mean, I think one of the ways that we need to begin, I think Senator Wellman was absolutely right, that professional development for our educators is essential. It's absolutely essential because educators are going to be transformed in their role. But I also want to say that there will be, when we get this kind of full-fledged process moving, there will be quote unquote savings. I don't like to use that term because what we're really going to be doing is we're going to be rerouting funding that we already have in different ways. I mean, so for example, not only do we have set asides for example, gifted programs, we also have a set aside for LAP, that's our remedial dollars. But then we have all of these ideas that come forward from the biennial new crop of legislators who have this idea, and it might not be a bad idea, but then you end up with a budget proviso that dedicates more state dollars to something like that. And so I want to really speak to something that is right in our ballpark. As an example, we have provisions right now that require accelerated learning opportunities, because there is not only a sentiment, but an actuality, the lack of those accelerated or advanced learning opportunities for students of color, and particularly African-American students. In a mastery-based learning system, you don't have to have an additional program, it's built in. Every student is going to have advanced learning opportunities because every student is going to be challenged through the individualized differentiation and being able to move forward with very different kinds of educational models. So again, I really want to reinforce Senator Wellman's point around the need for resources to be devoted, and I would start very much with our educators. That's where the investment needs to take place.
Hey, thank you. Looks like Dr. Smith, you have a comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick comment. It's kind of building on what Senator Wellman also talked about, but my comment is related to higher ed and to make sure that we incorporate the training that are taking place in teacher prep programs to take care of this and prepare them for this change. Because we're talking about a little bit of a change here, a big change really. And also from a counselor standpoint, we need to have the counselors more attuned with what this is all, mastery-based learning is all about, and how and what their role is in that process.
Thank you. Frida, looks like you had a comment as well.
Yeah, James, we did talk about that, but you're right. We do need to continue to work on those things. But mine is more of a question. Do we in any place, Heather, do you remember in our report explicitly mention this, the mastery-based learning work group and their recommendations?
We don't currently. Thank you, Frida. I did have that listed as a potential discussion question. So I am hearing general support for the recommendations of the work group, but as we talk about our report later today, this would be a good opportunity to talk about ways that these recommendations might support the issues that are already addressed in the report, and how there might also be a need for maybe an additional section to address these recommendations. So I'd love to hear from anyone who has thoughts on that.
Thank you. And it'd be good role modeling for squishing the silos. So thank you.
All right, so does anyone have any thoughts about the ways that these mastery-based learning recommendations can address the issues that are presented in the EOGOAC report in the current draft, especially related to recovery from COVID and the potential gaps that that has perpetuated?
Shall I? Heather?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that one of the areas where well, there are many areas where our work overlaps. And again, I think when we talk about supports for students who receive special education services and students with disabilities, I think, again, there is such a strong connection to that equity piece within mastery-based learning, as well as with sort of the addressing of the institutionalized racism. So I think that I'm probably trying to fit things in, and I'm trying not to do that, just take one report and fit it into another report. I'm trying to figure out how can we show real examples. And so one of the things I'm thinking about is the conversation we just had earlier about the North Thurston School District. And I feel to a certain extent that the way our system is set up, I understand we have accountability, and accountability is important. That's what we all want. But I think it's not accountability for the purpose of a compliance, which is what I really felt that North Thurston report was doing. It was trying to comply with an accountability system that was set up, you know, in the early 2000s under No Child Left Behind. But really, with the recommendations that this committee, the EOGOAC, has tried to impress upon OSPI, for example, on their ESSA plan, is what are we doing to ensure that at the end of the day, what is occurring is that students are learning, students are advancing, and I feel to a certain extent, sorry, I'm going off what I originally thought I was going to frame the response around. But I really feel as if our reports as an EOGOAC have been received more as additional compliance recommendations. And that for whatever reason, talk about, you know, 200 years of this is the way education has always been, or just the issue around the accountability and the need to comply that has been drilled into the minds of the system. I feel as if our school districts, our schools, our educators are floundering a bit with, okay, so what's the alternative? That's something that EOGOAC has not done, we have said, here's information to help you improve your technique. Here's information to help you see the problem. But we've not actually said, here's a system that you can put in place of what already exists, if any of that makes sense. Is that we're finally, I think, with the example that Mastery Base has delved into, we're finally able to point to, here is a system that has the power and the potential to really eliminate all of those reasons that we have given you sort of the compliance directives around. Does that make sense?
I see some heads nodding, and I see Senator Wellman has her hand raised. Go ahead, Wellman.
Well, I was with you and going along, Representative Santos. I think what came to my mind is where we are, where we want to be. I think both of those can be well articulated. I think the transition plan, the transition is the challenge, because it isn't turn this off, turn this on. It is not just the education system, the development of the teachers. It is also the community understanding and acceptance. This is a really big transformation. I think that as we have discussed, I believe, we have to some extent been aided by this crisis that we're in terms of how we've, seen that change. We're not in the classroom, and yet learning is taking place, et cetera. But I do think, I wonder, well, let me put it this way. I wonder if, each district, each community will be solving that in a unique way. And I don't know if we can prescribe a way necessarily. I think that we can lay out, as I've heard it at meetings that I've gone to, the pitfalls, the challenges, some suggestions of things that have worked in other places, et cetera. But I think that we really haven't spent a lot of time talking about, we've made incremental steps, which I think are what we can offer. But I also think communities have to take on the transformation themselves and own it for it to be truly successful. And that's going to be, they're doing the work to make it, to move it into the system, into the community, into reality.
Senator Wellman, I really don't disagree with what your point. And frankly, that's not the job of the EOGOAC. I think our job as an EOGOAC actually is to just point to, and here's an example of a system that actually addresses the challenges that are present in our existing system, challenges of institutionalized racism, challenges of separating and sorting students, which is what gifted and remedial is all about. That, the sifting and sorting, that is straight out of our industrial manufacturing mode of education. And I would talk about the I don't know, what's G, 7th assignment of the EOGOAC is to recommend policies and strategies that explore innovative school models showing success in closing the achievement gap. That actually is, that is our sort of charge. And so I agree, Senator Wellman, our job is not to actually mandate this, but to offer and point to a successful approach to education, if in fact our system is desiring to eliminate educational opportunity gaps. If our system is in fact interested in recognizing the products of institutionalized racism and institutionalized ableism, that I think that our Constitution is clear about equity and our responsibility as a state. And I think hopefully as a result of the environment, and again, I so appreciate your reminder all the time that we ought not be wasting a crisis. And in this, I think we're now showing a way instead of just saying, and bad school districts, here's all of the measures that say why. And in fact, our response so far has been around mandates and issuing mandates in order to achieve different results. And this way, it's different, I think. But I appreciate your saying that, because it is going to be about changing the hearts and minds and viewpoints, I think, of our of everyone in Washington State. And I think that's why there's, at least for me, I'll only speak for me, that's why I'm so excited about this notion of the profile of a graduate, where we can actually talk to everybody, regardless of what their native tongue is, regardless of what they do, regardless of why they think their students should be enrolled in our public schools, because then we would be able to point to, here are the specific sets of knowledge and skill sets that we believe every graduate should have. It's not expressed in a grade point average, which is a tremendous abstraction. It's not expressed in credit hours around certain subject matters, but it is about, what does this student know when they leave our schools, and what can they really do?
Oh, Senator Wama, looks like you have a comment. Go ahead.
Well, I know that other people want to speak, and so I will be, I have different hats that I wear because of, as we know, everybody has different backgrounds. So my background in marketing is about messaging. And, it has struck me that there are so many amazing groups, work groups on all kinds of different issues. And I don't want to see them remain siloed, especially when their messages are really so key to broader, broader visions and work that have been set up. I'm not expressing myself well, but I do know that both the Senate and the House have as their key focus that the lens through which they are approaching this session exactly what we are empowered to be addressing in the EOGOAC and what you just expressed, Representative Santos. And so again, not just the crisis, but the moment. I don't want to lose the moment in making sure that what we're talking about represents such a huge it's every family with children. It is our society. It is the business community who is not involved in what you just talked about and what we're trying to do. So I want to also, while this is going to be a great report, well, we have a number of great reports, EOGOAC, mastery-based work group. These reports are vital. I want to also maybe offline talk about how we can message the core work that is so important across the board to almost everybody in both of our caucuses, in all the caucuses in both houses. If I made myself clear, I'm not sure, but I know others have some comments too, and I'm anxious to hear them.
Thank you. Yes, it looks like Randy Spalding from the State Board of Education would like to make a comment. And since this is a State Board presentation, I think that would be appropriate. Randy, did you have a comment to make?
Yeah, hi, good morning. I just wanted to, on the question around EOGOAC's endorsement or using it in a recommendation, I think that's obviously your decision. I would say there's probably some benefit, in particular on two recommendations in the report. The one is around continuing the work group and some legislative action required that. And of course, the legislators on the group will be carrying the water on that one. But the other is there is also this notion of beginning to work towards implementation and with some support for professional development and policy supports for districts that want to support this. And we're going to be seeking private funding for that. And I think the endorsement of EOGOAC would go a long way in helping us make that case. So I just wanted to put that on the table.